Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. We have a pretty big and exclusive story in this one. CaseLabs is coming back. If you don't know the name, you should. We'll be talking about that. NZXT has an H510 Flow. It's going towards the airflow direction with its commonly closed off front panel cases. So we'll be going over those launch notes. There have been cable changes as well for this past week, where the EU is now pushing harder for a standardized phone charger connection or device charger connection in general to move away from proprietary or one-offs that end up in the trash, and plenty of other news from the hardware industry. Before that, this video is brought to you by Arctic and the Liquid Freezer 2 line of liquid coolers, which tested among the best in our thermal charts for CPU coolers. The Arctic Liquid Freezer series has had continual advancement since our original review, with updates in the mounting kit, including an AMD offset bracket for better thermals, and a longer warranty. Arctic also has its MX5 thermal compound available on the market now if you need some thermal paste for your regular maintenance. Learn more at the links in the description below. Some quick GN news first. We have just received our restock of the GN Modmats. That would include the large Volt Modmat, that's the newer design, the large original design, and then the medium Modmats do have some of the Volts and original larges in stock and shipping now on store.gamersnexus.net. If you previously back-ordered one, your shipment will be going out in the next few days. I have to go over to the distribution center and do some QC with them, and then I have to sign a bunch of them for the people who bought signed ones. So as soon as we get through that process, which will be, by the time this video goes up, we'll be done with that, then they'll begin shipping. So you should get shipping notices if you've back-ordered one, and if you wanted to wait till they're in stock to order, now's your chance. We don't have too many left after the back orders, but we've got enough for at least a couple days, hopefully. So if you want to grab one, head over to store.gamersnexus.net. We have more on the way, but it will be a few months before they get here. So now's your best chance to grab one of the Modmats if you want a PC building work surface that protects your table and your components. It's an anti-static conductive surface that is highly heat resistant. So if you do things like tube bending or soldering, you can work on the surface and know that your table underneath is protected. It's also got screw tracking grids. It has wiring diagrams. If you do any kind of work with Molex, fan header, SATA, or anything else, we've got diagrams on there to help you out. So check it out on the store. Thank you to everyone over the years who has been buying these. We will continue to make them. We continue to have them on the way in. It's been a challenge the last year with global logistics, but we've been managing it, I think, about as well as is possible, and maybe even a little bit better in some instances. So thank you for buying them. Let's get on to the first news topic. This one is CaseLabs. We received an email actually in early September about the purchase of CaseLabs by a new owner named ML Ritterstedt. The CaseLabs trademarked the designs, the website, the social media account, basically everything. The graphics were all purchased by this new owner with whom GN has spoken via email. If you don't remember, CaseLabs tragically went bankrupt and closed operations after losing a major client previously. CaseLabs was a boutique case manufacturing brand run by a team of skilled machinists, and it made most of its parts in the US and on its own CNC or machining equipment. We actually somewhat recently revisited the CaseLabs SMA8 Monster case. It's a really cool one. We talked about it, gave it a full review, even though it was a post-mortem for the company. And the brand was generally regarded for extreme quality, matched with equally extreme, maybe fair, but nonetheless high prices. GN has seen and read court documents pertaining to the transaction and can confirm its legitimacy. This is actually coming back. This isn't a 3DFX scenario where it's all a big hoax that's pushed through a joke social media account online. This is actually happening. We spoke with the new owner about CaseLabs and asked about his plans for it. And Ritterstedt told us, quote, "The immediate plan is to bring the original lineup back into production, which will not be an easy task. The parts will be in a flat, unfolded state, and there are no instructions for how to fold the parts, so me and my manufacturers will have to work out how to fold each individual part." Now, this statement relates back to how cases are made, where specific machines are used in each step to maybe cut or stamp, depending on what it is, and fold the steel and aluminum sheets to create the paneling. We have plenty of factory tour footage showing how this is done if you're curious, but it all involves machines and they need careful plans so that the factories can get the work done to assemble it all at the end. The new owner also told us the following, quote, "The most important thing to me is that the spirit of CaseLabs is maintained no matter what new products I release. I want to keep the same level of quality and craftsmanship and, where it's possible, modularity as before CaseLabs went bankrupt. I'm a firm believer in the right to repair and keeping it simple for the end user. existing and future products from CaseLabs shall reflect that. I guess I'll just go ahead and say this publicly for the first time too, but not long ago when we were looking at the options of at some point maybe doing a GN case, and we're not doing one, by the way, right now. We decided not to go that route, at least for the moment. But when we were looking at that, one of the things that I had started considering was maybe we could buy what's left of CaseLabs and do something with it. And ultimately, it didn't make a lot of sense for where we are right now as a business, as a team, time management, all that stuff, financials. We had no idea what that would even cost. But just for fun to share, it was something we had thought about because, I mean, personally, I liked the cases from them that we had worked with. So hopefully it comes back, as the owner is saying, maintaining the same level of quality. We'll look at it as soon as it's ready and do reviews as usual. As for timelines, right now we don't have a timeline for CaseLabs fully returning with products. It's going to be a challenging process, it sounds like, from speaking with the new owner, where obviously they had to get through all of the legal stuff first, and now they need to sort of decompile what CaseLabs left behind and figure out how to piecemeal together the designs so that they're able to manufacture the product as desired. So we'll keep you informed on that. NZXT H510. NZXT recently announced a new case. It's called the H510 Flow. The H510 is an existing case. There was the H500 series previously. You might know the Elite series as well, like the H510 Elite. But this one makes claims of being airflow focused. So it's taken the front panel and basically punched holes in a sheet of steel and put that on instead of glass or solid steel previously. Now, interestingly here, the H500 series cases, sometimes depending on the configuration, actually had reasonable thermals thanks to the negative pressure configuration, where it was exhaust at the back with no intake fans. Adding fans to the front of the case with a uniquely successful negative pressure setup might not work out as well as it sometimes seems like it would, to just slap fans on the front, but we'll see how it goes. We did some testing back when these cases were new where we did put fans in the front, and sometimes it ended up in worse thermals for some components, better for others. The GPU is a great example where, because of NZXT's unique negative pressure setup in that case, the GPU ends up pulling its air in through the PCIe slot covers rather than somewhere else in the case. And this means it has direct access to cool air from immediately outside that's really close to the GPU. So it worked out well for GPU thermals when, if you just look at the box and you don't really think much about the pressure setup, it would look like the GPU would be starving for air. But this was a unique, maybe accident, but either way, a unique way to get decent thermals for the GPU. This will be lost as fans are added to the front, but as long as the cool air coming in from the front exceeds the cool air that was coming in from the back previously, it would be a net positive. We'll test it out, obviously. There are some reviews of this case already. Gamers Nexus was not informed of the H510 Flow ahead of launch, nor was it provided one by NZXT. That's fine. I could buy every H510 Flow that they're making right now if we wanted to, but the real problem is that we didn't get one and we weren't told about it. But there are some reviews out there. We have one that we have just gotten, actually from BPS Customs. We'll link him below. You should check out his channel if you don't know it. He does really cool custom builds. He's been playing around with other stuff like liquid nitrogen overclocking lately. So Brian has sent us his. We'll be reviewing that shortly. Now, we don't yet have thoughts on the case, seeing as we haven't reviewed it yet, but previously we spoke with NZXT. They had asked for our opinions and thoughts on airflow-focused cases, and actually specifically about the H500 series closer to when those originally launched. We spoke with one of their product managers and some people at the company about what we thought they could potentially do better for the case lineup in the future. And NZXT actually at that time told us that's not going to happen when we asked about what about like a mesh case with airflow focus. So here we are. It has happened. And we weren't told about it, but that's okay. We'll review it just the same, treat it like we do every other product. We're just letting you know why we didn't have one at launch, because we were electively excluded, which doesn't hurt my feelings, but really always makes me more concerned about what message does that send to smaller reviewers who can't afford to just do what we do, which is whatever we want, whenever we want. So it's always the message that concerns us about what it sends to the upstart reviewers, the people coming into the community who maybe don't have as much pull as we've earned these days. As for why we didn't get informed, well, we don't know specifically, but we have a few ideas. Ooh, fire. Get that. There it is. Up next, the European Commission, which is functionally the executive branch of the EU, is working on a new standard for universal charging via USB Type-C. Assuming the proposal clears the European Parliament, the legislation will take form of a revised Radio Equipment Directive, or RED. The Radio Equipment Directive already contains a section outlining Europe's intentions for a common charger, going back actually as far as 2009. At the time, the goal was to harmonize the device chargers by roughly 2011. That never happened, so now here we are with a government or a legislative approach to forcing the solution instead. The EU had a number of other voluntary measures in place in an attempt to work with vendors on developing a common charging solution, even encouraging manufacturers to develop one amongst themselves. However, citing the lack of a solution, the European Union has opted to take a legislative approach. Quote, "We gave industry plenty of time to come up with their own solutions. Now time is ripe for legislative action for a common charger." The proposed legislation would include a harmonized charging port for electronic devices, that would be USB-C, harmonized fast charging technology, unbundling the sale of a charger from the sale of the electronic device, improved information for consumers, and the RED would further the EU's goal of addressing sustainability in products and mitigating the growing e-waste problem, the latter of which has unused and disposed of chargers accounting for some 11,000 tons of e-waste every year. Now, this only applies for wired charging. Wireless charging is not affected here, so devices which use a wireless charging solution will not have to follow whatever rules end up getting passed. The obvious target then again is Apple's Lightning connector, which would be a clear casualty here of the proposed legislation if it goes through, and that would unite things under USB Type-C instead. If it passes, device makers would have 2 years to become compliant with the law, and should companies like Apple wish to continue avoiding USB-C, they would likely have to do it with wireless charging phones instead. Up next, some Intel Alder Lake discussion. This is the immediately upcoming CPU from Intel. Intel will be launching its 12th gen, 12,000 series, maybe more appropriately, of CPUs later this year. They're going to start with most likely the K-SKU flagships, with the rest of the lineup probably following early 2022. That part's not news. What is news is that there was a photo surfaced on Bilibili recently where there's a photo now of the socket. So that's the LGA 1700 socket. It's a new socket. It has 1700 pins, as the name would suggest, but there's also an extra bit of space available to potentially expand it to 1800 pins, suggesting that for at least some intents and purposes, although not all, this socket will be able to be used going forward, even if it's not fully compatible with the whole line of CPUs that can physically fit in it. So the socket is oblong, and this makes sense because they didn't have much room to expand towards the memory. So LGA 1700 grows a bit vertically. That will affect how coolers mount to the IHS. It will affect the amount of total coverage of the IHS as a percentage versus the cold plate of coolers. And additionally, some of the changes that are being made to CPU cooler mounting kits, like you saw Noctua recently launching its free upgrade kit for LGA 1700 users, some of those changes might relate back to the fact that there's a lower Z height for the socket than some of the past sockets. There's also some etchings on the socket that read LGA 17XX / LGA 18XX, suggesting that the socket will indeed survive beyond Alder Lake, which tracks with reports that Intel's Raptor Lake would also drop into an LGA 17 or 18 XX socket. So it looks like Intel's got room for maybe 100 more pins, plus or minus a bit, and that's what it would be used for. Up next, Epic Games adding anti-cheat support for its easy anti-cheat solution via Linux. This is actually pretty big news right now, especially with the Valve Steam Deck, and we're going to be talking about that next as well. But Epic Games recently posted to its dev blog and announced that Epic Online Services will now support Linux and Mac with easy anti-cheat. Previously, this was only available for Windows developers, so developers working within the Epic ecosystem, i.e. Unreal Engine 5 or 4, will be able to use easy anti-cheat now on more operating systems. Although this news sounds somewhat mundane on the surface, it is actually a big deal for the upcoming Steam Deck, because if the popular esports games especially aren't supported on the OS, that limits the audience. Epic directly names the Steam Deck actually on its supported platforms list for easy anti-cheat, and that inherently means Linux support. Valve's Steam Deck push may be part of the driving force for more Linux adoption, or minimally, it shows peers in the industry, like Epic, that the world is ready to try again for a mainstream Linux environment. Epic noted that both Wine and Proton compatibility layers will be supported, and that developers can activate anti-cheat support as of the latest SDK update, so it's already out there. Also in Steam Deck news, Valve posted an FAQ, or at least updated its existing FAQ with some more information on the Steam Deck. We already knew a good amount of the things on that list. For example, the screen difference between the different models was already known, but there is some new information as well. Among the most interesting things now on the Valve FAQ for the Steam Deck, we have a couple of items we can share with you. Valve clarified that yes, multiple accounts can be used on a single Steam Deck. That would mean account data and game settings are isolated. This works the same way as Steam on Windows, but it's good to know that it'll transport over directly to the Steam Deck. Non-Steam games can be run through the Proton compatibility layer. If you buy a game from outside of Steam or install it through some other creative method, then you'll potentially still be able to run it as long as it can run with Proton. Valve also confirmed earlier suspicions from us and others that the Steam Deck UI will replace Big Picture mode. Valve said of its offline mode the following, quote, "Just like a PC, you'll need to be online to download games and play online multiplayer games. Once a game is installed on disk, you can play while Steam Deck is offline, unless the game requires an internet connection." This one's obviously particularly important since the Steam Deck is technically a portable device, and so it is likely to be entering and exiting internet availability as it's being used. Valve's existing offline mode, we think, at least Patrick and I think that leaves a lot to be desired, but in the very least, at least it works the same way between how we know it works on Windows and how it will work on the Steam Deck, so it's predictable, and that's important too. Micro SD cards will use the ext4 with case folding file format. As for the rest, Valve confirmed that docked or active charging performance does not change, so if you've got it on battery versus plugged in, it's not going to matter from what they're saying. And then finally, one of the other most interesting points we saw was that dual boot or multi-boot will be supported, and BIOS is accessible. So hopefully it has a better BIOS than what we've seen on some of the OEM PCs recently. We would really like to see some overclocking support, even if it's not intended to be used. But since these platforms are much like a PC, in theory you can use software to do some overclocking. We just like doing it through BIOS. Either way, that's what Valve's saying. In essence, Valve's current ethos seems to treat the Steam Deck basically like a Windows computer, even though it's not a Windows computer. So it should be pretty predictable. Up next, AMD CEO Dr. Lisa Su spoke at the Code Conference in California recently about AMD's current business and the global manufacturing challenges. This affects nearly all industries at this point, but obviously AMD probably feels like it's at the center of it since all of its products are silicon related. Most interesting out of the conference, from Sue at least, she stated that the industry has always oscillated between oversupply and undersupply. We would agree with this. She was also quick, however, to point out that, quote, "This time it's different." Sue spoke of the active fabrication plant construction projects all around the world right now, and indirectly is referencing TSMC's expansion. Global Foundries, for example, is pushing. And although, of course, Lisa Su didn't say this, its competitor Intel is building out more fabs as well. She also mentioned that 18 to 24 months time to activate a new plant is expected, and that it can take longer in some cases. Sue indicated that companies began planning for this last year, and so expansion, as long as there isn't too much backlog to demand, will provide manufacturing relief potentially as early as 2022, which isn't that early. But if things improve gradually as we approach it, then there's a positive side, which is what we need at this point. But in the very least, if we're taking an optimistic look at it, 2022 is better than some of the initial projections from the beginning of this year. So there's that much. That's all we can really say on the upside of it. Sony launches a PS5 SSD through its own brand, but it's not called Sony. It's Next Storage. Having only recently opened the M.2 support via the PlayStation 5 software update, Sony is now offering M.2 SSDs of its own, and that's through a subsidiary that's called Next Storage. The choice to release the SSD through the rather obscure brand seems somewhat of an odd one, and Sony will also be competing with SSDs from well-known third parties like Team Group, Seagate, and everyone else who makes an SSD. Nonetheless, the Next Storage NEMPA series seems to tick the boxes for an M.2 SSD that operates over PCIe Gen 4 for the PS5. The NEMPA series comes in either a 1TB or 2TB configuration and also uses an integrated heatsink, which Sony touts as a requirement for PS5 compatible SSDs. For the 2TB NEMPA SSD, Next Storage, we're going to go with that name. Next Storage claims sequential read and write speeds of 7,300 or 6,900 megabytes per second, respectively. Additionally, the 2TB SSD has random I/O speeds of 1 million IOPS for each direction, read and write, and an endurance rating of 1400 TBW. As is usually the case, the 1TB NEMPA SSD has numbers that are a little diminished in comparison. The 1TB model offers sequential read and write speeds of 7,300 and 6,000 megabytes per second, and random read and write speeds of 750K or 1 million IOPS, with much lower endurance rating of 700 TBW. Although lower, it directly corresponds with a halving of the capacity of the drive, so this makes sense. There's no word right now, at least at the time of filming, on pricing or availability. It does have drop-in support for the PlayStation 5 specifically. That's out of beta now, ready to go. You can get it through a software update. Maybe we'll work on these, not really sure. It'd be maybe interesting from a thermal perspective. We already have the consoles wired up, so if there's enough interest, we can look into it. Discord just closed a round of funding of $500 million influx capital to Discord, which brings the company's valuation to about $15 billion with a B. At $15 billion valuation, that's twice what the company was worth last year. Bloomberg reports that the funding round was led by Dragoneer Investment Group, Bailey Gifford & Co., and several other investment groups. According to Bloomberg, Discord will use the funding to, quote, invest in new features and tools, as well as expand the workforce. Discord's trajectory has been interesting over the years. It started out as an edgy, in-your-face, this is definitely like an X-Fire replacement, if anyone remembers that, gamer chat service, and it has worked hard to distance itself from being only a gaming thing as it's introduced other features and tried to more directly compete with Slack rather than being gaming Slack. The Discord user base now is up to 150 million monthly users. There have been nonstop reports as well of companies knocking on Discord's door with reported acquisition interest, and that would include some we've reported on. Amazon, for example, was allegedly interested, as was Epic Games, and most recently Microsoft. Discord's popularity has grown so much that even Sony has struck a deal with bringing Discord integration into its PlayStation consoles, and they've always had something of a walled garden. This amount of money and interest from groups that, if we're honest, probably don't really relate with the core audience of Discord or the origins of Discord does bring up questions from us about how this will affect Discord's future and the path it's trying to take. If it is trying to reduce its specific appeal to a gaming audience or a certain demographic, then this is, I guess, the direction to go. Just a matter of, that's a lot of money for a chat service. So we'll see what they add. They do have potential. Lastly, we want to talk about home computing pioneer and visionary Sir Clive Sinclair, who unfortunately passed away just recently, aged 81. Sinclair had a pivotal role in the development of computers over the decades. After a stint in electronics journalism, Sinclair went on to found companies Sinclair Radionics and Sinclair Research. Through these companies, Sinclair not only developed a line of home computers, but also the world's first pocket calculator. Sinclair dabbled in a lot of projects over the years, and these all directly or minimally indirectly relate to and influence today's electronics. We wanted to talk about some of those, give you some of the history in computing for calculators and early computers, and talk about some of Sinclair's claim to fame. He was perhaps best known for the ZX line of home computers. This started with the ZX80, which launched in 1980, and Sinclair helped kick off the home computing boom in Europe with this computer. The ZX80 was also notable for being extremely affordable. It was the first home computer in the UK that was priced under 100 GBP at the time. Sinclair would go on to produce successors such as the ZX81 and the ZX Spectrum, the latter being notable for several other reasons. The ZX Spectrum was among the first home computers that was capable of real-time graphics, and was one of the first home computers at the time to have a color display, hence the name Spectrum. And the ZX Spectrum would go on to become Britain's best-selling home computer, and it would compete with another venerable home computer of the time, you likely know it, the Commodore 64. In fact, Rare Limited, you might also known as Rareware or just Rare, would get its start as a company by the name of Ultimate Play the Game, which developed games for the ZX Spectrum. As The Guardian notes, Sinclair would become a household name after the popularity of the ZX models, and he was awarded knighthood in 1983 for his contributions to the home computing industry. Sinclair's daughter, Belinda Sinclair, said that, quote, "It was the ideas, the challenge that he found exciting. He'd come up with an idea and say, there's no point in asking if someone wants it because they can't imagine it," which is actually an awesome quote. That makes a lot of sense, and it's exactly the type of person who would say that, who would contribute so much to a growing and at the time new industry. There's a great homage to Sinclair computers online. We'll link that in our show notes doc below if you want to check it out, if you want to learn more or just learn some about the history of computers. So that's it for this time. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. And you can subscribe for more as always. Check back for more videos. We'll see you all next time.